Well, good morning, sir.
What's happening, man?
Good to see you.
You too.
Thank you.
Been a while. Are you are you still in KC?
Still in KC.
Okay, I was there last weekend, man.
Oh, you know what? I think I saw a picture of you at the Lewisburg cider mill, maybe.
Yeah,
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 yeah. I saw that at some point, and I thought, so close,
yeah, man.
yet so
Are
far away.
you Overland Park? I'm trying to remember.
Gardner,
Okay.
kind of all in Johnson County there.
Yeah, man. Very cool. Wow. So tell me about this new endeavor.
Uh, the intentional father kind of birthed out of a keynote speech that I was working on, and ended up not not going down that route. And so I thought, well, I want to continue to develop this content and utilize it. It's kind of a little ministry passion project. And so I was juggling either writing a book and then doing a podcast, or doing a podcast and then writing a book. So I thought I'll do the podcast first and help that generate more content and
Yeah.
lead to more conversations. And it's been fun. It's been good. Definitely has helped sharpen my game as a father, if you will.
Yeah,
And
cool.
it's led to right now I'm doing a little small group experience for some dads
Okay.
online through Zoom. And so
That's cool.
just kind of running with it and seeing where it goes.
Yeah, good. Good to hear, man. Excited for you. That's good.
But I need to learn from the dads that have gone on before me. So
How old are your kids?
they're 15 and 16 now.
Wow, man. Yeah, well, I'm not too far in front of you. I
Um,
guess a little bit. Well, yeah, a little bit, but not much.
yeah. I've heard from a few people. I always ask this question: the difference between parenting minor children versus adult children. What's that been like?
Um,
You have both still. You still have one at home?
well, our no, our youngest is a sophomore at IWU.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I know.
Man.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
Yeah, the older two are married. You know, Olivia's out in KC. Our middle daughter Lauren's in Cincinnati. She's married. Um, they got married within 5 months, so they broke my back and my bank. And
Yeah.
then our youngest, yeah, she'll turn 20 here in
Oh my goodness.
uh, yeah, just a couple weeks here. Yeah, pretty crazy. Yeah, life is it's good. Well, the difference, I mean, there's a phrase that we kind of use like um, in the stage when they're adults, it's like guide, don't decide.
Oh.
You know, that our thing is just to guide them to speak into them, to encourage them, but there's a transfer where they're gone. You have to release them to do what they need to do. You know, I I always really anticipated every phase of life. I anticipated when I was young and in elementary, I anticipated going into middle school. And then in middle school, I anticipated going to high school into college, college into marriage, marriage into kids, kids into career, all that stuff. But like going through the transition of empty nest and that parenting moment, it's a cathartic thing because for me it was because it was the first time I remember not really looking forward to the next phase of life, as weird as
Mhm.
that sounds. I mean, some people are like they can't wait till their kids are gone. They're like, yeah, you know. And but I was really melancholy about it. We had three daughters, and but it was like a test to go, okay, am I going to really release them in the sense of just allowing them to make their own decisions and to go. And I learned something really interesting too. Our oldest daughter, Olivia, we're the most alike. She's definitely like all the firstborn. She's got all that going. She's just like me. We've been close, and um, she got married December 31st, and the next summer she we saw each other, and we were at Oklahoma Wesleyan, your alma mater, for one of our summer camps. And she said, "Hey, I need to talk to you." It looked like something was wrong, and she pulled me aside and she said, "I've really been hurt that you've been distant from me." Now she's been married 6 months, and we had a real learning moment together because, well, I shared with her, I said, "Olivia, I've intentionally withdrawn from your life in some very specific and intentional ways because you're married, you have another man in your life, you have a caregiver." And she didn't quite, wasn't able to see that perspective until her and I, talked about it. But it was a reminder for me that even at that stage of life, because at that point she's um, in her mid 20s, and I'm thinking, okay, she's married, she moved far away, she moved out of state. And it's not like, we cut ties, we talk all the time, we work together. But I learned through that some things don't change. And here's a couple. To me, parenting boils down to two things. Um, One thing is energy, and one thing is observation. And what I tell parents is, like, if you could shrink down to me what parenting is and fathering is, it's 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 the energy you give to it. So, a strategic decision, I think the most strategic decision that my wife, Ariana, and I made about parenting at the very, before we even had kids, and we didn't realize really how strategic it was, but looking back, it was a game changer, is we decided to live on one income
Mm.
throughout our kids' early years. Now I didn't realize to the effect, how much sacrifice we made in the present, until I look back now and I see, wow, we always were able to do, we didn't have the nicer cars, we didn't have the bigger house, but I think having the smaller house actually was so good. And I've heard this from a lot of parents after they've raised their kids. They've said, now this sounds weird, I've never heard anybody talk about this, but when you're cramped together in a small space as a family, it actually really is a very good thing.
Mm.
And so I honestly am glad the struggles of what we went through financially, being crammed in this little house with five of us, was the best thing for us. We are really close as a family still. And but but the what I say about energy is, if you have two parents and they're both working, and they're giving both parents are giving the majority of their energy to other things besides their kids at very critical times. For me, those critical times are birth to probably about 12 years old. In that range is when I think our kids need the most of our energy towards them. And if we're spending it, if both parents are spending it elsewhere, I personally, in 30 years of working with families, have seen the results negatively, almost overwhelmingly, from parents that are both so consumed with what's happening outside of their home that when they get home, they just don't have the energy to give to their parenting. And so then they start to cut corners. They start to substitute time for other things, favors, money, you know, all that stuff. And so if I could give advice to families, it would be, as best you can, give as much energy during those early first years. And that means being present, And I really believe that quantity is better than quality when it comes to time. Now, people talk about quality time. Um, I don't think you really get quality time until they're older.
Yeah.
Like you
Yeah.
can't sit down with a 10-year-old and go, "Hey, we're going to have 30 minutes of quality time," or it just doesn't work. I mean, if your kids are in sports like ours and they're running all over the place and you've been through this, like you're just kind of moving and you're just trying to keep your head above water. To me, it's that kind of junk quantity time to me that really matters more when they're younger because you're just there, you're around them, you're involved. But energy is the first thing, and just pouring as much energy as you can into that to the point of exhaustion. And then the second one was observation. And so here's what I've learned, Aaron. I was just saying, um, me and Ariana, when we were flying out to see our daughter Olivia last week, we were in line at TSA in the airport, and I looked over and I saw this little girl. She's probably 5 years old, and she was doing something, and she was watching her dad, and making sure that he was watching her. And the number one thing that I heard growing up when my kids were growing up was two words: Dad, watch, or three words: Dad, watch me. They learned to do a cartwheel. They did an assignment. They learned something on, as an athlete or as an artist. We had kids involved in music and things, and they would say, "Hey, Dad, watch this." And my focus on them is what they wanted. Now, here's what I learned, Aaron. Like when they get older, that doesn't change. And
Mm.
that conversation with Olivia that I talked to you about, that reminded me that what Olivia, I believe, was saying to me was, "Dad, I want you to watch. I want to know that you're watching me. I want to know that you're watching out for me." And that level of watching, I've seen from the time they could talk and interact with me when they were little to today, has that message of "Dad, watch me" has never changed. It's still there. And I thought going into having kids that are adults, like, okay, it's not like I'm done as a dad, but they've kind of moved on, and especially if they get married as daughters, it's like they've got another person that's, their protector and provider. And that's true, but they still want, desire, and need me to be watching and know and letting them know that I watch. And that, to me, that was a revelation of having adult kids, is to go, that's what they want. They want to know that I'm still engaged and involved enough to be watching them. And I would say that all the years of working with youth ministry, 30 years and still going, leading a national youth ministry now and literally knowing thousands of families and scenarios. The reason I'm so glad, Aaron, that you're doing this is because um, the number one need for this generation, and it's been this way for at least 15 years, is fatherlessness. It's the number one need is fathers. Um, and I see it. I see the fallout of it. I see dads that, even now, when we think fatherlessness, we think, okay, deadbeat dad, you know, doesn't pay alimony, all that stuff. And it's that for sure. But it's also families that are intact, they're married, but the dads are just
Yeah.
gone, maybe physically, spiritually, emotionally, all that stuff. That's the number one thing. So what you're doing is really important, and the message needs to be heard by dads for sure.
Man, that's so encouraging. Uh, Got me tearing up a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, I think probably one of my biggest fears was uh, thinking that my time and influence as a father was limited to the first 18 years of life. And man, I'm very similar where when I think of the empty nest, I'm not real excited about it.
Yeah.
I'm not celebrating to have a countdown. I'm like, man, how can I delay that as much, and not delay the empty nest as, I don't want to enable, but just that
Yeah.
time, that precious time with the kids under the roof.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I'm loving fatherhood. And, uh, as a youth pastor, I know this stereotypical teenage years that parents hate, but man, I haven't experienced it yet. Like, it's every year it just gets better. And, but it's good to hear you say that, because it's gives me some hope. Like, it's not going to get worse.
Yeah.
It can
Yeah.
get better. And
Yeah.
I assume your intention with distancing is to not cross any boundaries and be that, because I've experienced that, parents who are too involved in
Yeah.
their adult, especially after marriage. It's like, man, you gotta let them spread their wings and fly.
Yeah.
Um, dude, I have a journal. I still have it. It's in a little Rubbermaid under my bed, and from one of the NTS, you did a breakout with leaders, adult leaders or youth pastors or something, and talked about fatherlessness. I mean, gosh,
Mm.
that had been at least 10 years ago. I mean, a long time
Wow.
ago. And then
Yeah.
I have another entry. I don't know if it's in that same journal, but it was around like 2015 or 2016, where you said, for the first time in US history, more children were born to unmarried families than to married families. And man, I wrote that down, and uh, just that impacted me. And yeah, I think the role of a father is so important.
Yeah. Oh man. I picked up something, Aaron. Uh, and it's one of those things, once you see this and hear this, you'll never unsee it kind of thing about fatherhood. So I'm friends with a lady named Karen Koval. She leads something called the Hollywood Prayer Network. It's part of the network that I lead. And she said that almost every story that comes out of Hollywood is about fathers.
Mm,
And and she gave a couple examples, and then I thought about that and I thought, wow. I mean, you see it everywhere. At the root of almost every story is someone's relationship with their father. And TV shows, movies, all of it. And I think what that's rooted in is our core need for our relationship with God, as our perfect heavenly
yeah.
Father. That if we have that relationship squared away, everything else kind of makes sense. And wouldn't it make sense that, just from a spiritual perspective, as a pastor speaking, to say that if Satan would attack humanity, he would try to distort what a father is,
Mm,
and that makes logical sense that he would do that, and that's what I've seen, is that most young people have a hard time, if they've had a bad relationship with their dad. They have a hard time. It's a barrier to really fully receive God's grace and love, because the father broken part of their life is creating a backup, so to speak, and that's been true. So that's one thing, is just recognizing what you see in the world and the need for it. I mean, it's coming out of Hollywood, and if you think about it, Hollywood, it's not a dark, evil place, in my opinion. I mean, it's like everything. There's good and bad. Obviously, they're very influential. I'm so grateful that there are people of faith in there inserting themselves into all these spaces of influence everywhere. But if you've got that brokenness in society, those stories are coming out of broken people with broken relationships with their dads, and that's making its way into what's being produced. It would make sense.
yeah. I was going to ask you about something, but I'm going to do a little audible here.
Yeah.
So, um, In the chat, I've just now sent you what I was going to ask you about, but I'm not going to ask you about that. But you can look at it for a second.
Okay.
I'm going to shift this because you already started going down this road. So you see law number 11 there.
Yeah.
So it's this. I made 17 laws of the intentional father, and this season of the podcast is just unpacking each of these. So I'm gonna I'm gonna skip ahead a
Yeah.
few for with you just because you already hit this. But the law of love, love is spelled T.I.M.E. Prioritize family over work. Spend one-on-one time with each child. I last night I had a conversation with a dad who is a lineman. He works on power lines
Okay.
and was worked like 95 hours last week. And this week he got called in and he told his boss no, he's going to spend time with his kids, go with his daughter on a field trip, and had an argument with boss man because the boss man said you need to get your priorities straight, and
Mm.
he basically said I am, and you're not
Yeah.
it. And I
Yeah.
was so proud of him. But when uh, if we're to think of the dads, maybe a dad's like listening to this and go, okay, I see the need for that. How do I do that? Maybe that father
Yeah.
has been there, but has been absent figuratively. What are some ways that you might suggest practically for dads to observe and pour that energy out into their kids?
Yeah. Well, the one thing I would say too is, you know, you can come from a lot of different angles on this and prioritization thing because the one thing I've seen is some fathers that would say, I'm prioritizing work over my family. And that's a great concept. Obviously, I'm, you know, for and would just feel like it was the right thing to make sure that you keep it in balance. But I also know, um, like the guy you're talking about that would work so many hours that just loses sight of everything. I would also know people and men and fathers that would use that excuse of prioritization for laziness at their job.
Right. Yeah.
And so I want to be clear that there's a continuum here. There's people what I would call on kind of the just being blunt here, like on the lazy side, and then there's the workaholic side. And I think being in the middle somewhere, and I know for me, like I've had a just been fortunate enough in the career I've had to have a lot of flexibility to do things, to be able to leave work early, maybe to go to a game, make it up later, do things like that. But I think it's about saying, I love the fact that a dad would say, I'm working hard to make sure, my family's taken care of. And especially if I'm the only income earner, that
Mhm.
there's love in that too. But here's the way I look at it, like I've always lived a busy life. You know that we've been friends for a long time. And I look back and I actually had I didn't realize this until probably about 15 years ago, maybe, but I've always had two jobs my whole life. I've always had multiple things going besides my main career. Um, and my dad was a public high school teacher, which is a very intense job during the school year. And he was a local church pastor at a small neighborhood church. And being a pastor of a small neighborhood church is actually a lot more involved than being on staff at a bigger church where there's multiple people because he had to do a lot.
Mhm.
I mean, he did the landscaping at the church, for example, amongst, a lot of other things that maybe a lot of pastors don't do today or wouldn't do or whatever. But all that to say, I saw and what I learned from him was, um, through osmosis is you can do all that. Now in the midst of that, my dad was always there for me. He was at games, he was doing things, and I look back and I go, I don't know how he really did it, honestly, because he had a lot going. I've always been one to say I think you can. you can be all in for your career and your family at the same time. I don't think it's always necessarily an either or
Hmm.
when it comes to prioritization. I really think that you can do both. And as long as you're focused, and again, I would say it's as much about energy sometimes at some phases than it is time. There's no replacement for time. There's absolutely no replacement for time. You can't cheat on that forever. But if you might be in a season where as a dad you might be like if you're a farmer, there are certain months where you're just going to be gone. It's just the way it is. Or if you're travel for your work and you're in sales, you're going to do that. But you also have to have that ebb and flow, right? Where you have to come back um but I would say that, investing your time, it really does sneak up on you, and you have to be intentional about it, in how you do it. Now, I ended like our official time with our kids, with each one of them, with a significant trip that we took, that we can talk about. But one practical little pragmatic thing that I would say too on that is when our kids were really young, my wife and I stayed up. We stayed in this little cottage on Lake Michigan near where we live here, and in Michigan, and we decided, we want our kids to experience certain things before they leave the house. And so we made this about a 20-page document. We stayed up late 2 nights. We put the kids to bed and we stayed up and we just wrote out this, what we called like our family atlas.
Hmm.
And it was like, here's what we want to do. And it included books to read, movies, experiences, rites of passage, values, practical things like how to change a tire on a car, how to build a fire, which was just kind of my little thing, as a person that loves the outdoors. But so they weren't all like, you know, things that were, necessarily important to everyone. But to me, like learning how to build a fire was just a fun little thing to do,
Yeah.
but learning how to build a budget, all that stuff. And we stuck with that all the way through, and it ended with a trip that I took them on, when they graduated high school. So I would encourage dads, if you can do that, sit down and write out some things. Like for us, it was the big birthdays were 5, 10, 13, and 16. That's when we did big birthday things. We didn't do it every year, but on their fifth birthday, we made a big deal. On their 10th, when they were 13 years old, when they were 16, and then we did the other trip. So we just came up with lots of different things, and I think it really doesn't matter a lot of times what you do. It's just that you have a direction or thought process.
That's good. What can you give an example of that 18-year-old trip?
Yeah, yeah. So when we did this, our kids were young, and we really were lower middle class. Our whole early marriage and their childhood, even up to when they graduated. And so when we put this, I honestly was like, I don't know how we're going to do this financially, but it worked out. It was cool. But um, we put in there when they're 16, my wife was going to take them to Mackinac Island, which, if you're listening to this and you know what that is, it's like this magical place. It's only 4 hours from where we live. It's incredible. And then when they were 18, I would take them on a trip anywhere in the world they wanted to go for 10 days.
Oh, yeah.
And they got to decide. So my oldest daughter went to London. We spent time throughout the UK. Second daughter wanted to go to Rome, so we traveled throughout Italy. And then the third one wanted to go to Spain. That was just 2 years ago. So we went to Madrid and then traveled around there, went to Barcelona, different places. And what I did on that trip was, I arranged it all, and we had time to save up, so I knew it was coming. But then I wrote a card every day for them to open. I wrote 10 cards, and in each card was um, something about life that I wanted to leave them with. So, for example, one was about marriage, one was about money, one was about their relationship with God, one was about um, their physical health, and I had 10 different topics. And then what I did was I just wrote typically 8 to 10 bullet points about, so for example, about your health. I would, write 10 things I wanted to leave them with. And then what I would do is, and I sealed them in envelopes, and then I wrote the topic on the front of the card so they knew what was in there. So for example, it would say marriage or money or whatever. And then I would say, when we got up for the day, I'd go, you look through the envelopes, you pick the one you want for the day and bring it with you. And then as we're traveling today, at some point, we'll open that up and talk about it. And so sometimes it was over dinner, sometimes it was when we were walking, sometimes we're on a train, sometimes it was in the hotel room at night. And then it was my kind of last chance while they were under my shelter at home to be able to just like take all the values that a lot of it they'd heard me say, but a lot of it they hadn't. And I was like, okay, this is kind of my big chance to really give it all to you. And what I realized is like that 9, 10 days would be the most time that I would ever have with them probably in their whole life, one on one.
Oh,
It
yeah.
was 10 days of just the two of us, which probably never happened before and probably never happened after. And I was able to just leave them with that. And then that way they could take them and keep them, and I'm sure they probably have. I've never asked them, but I imagine they probably wouldn't throw those away. I would hope not. All those envelopes.
Yeah.
Dad's gone, just throw those away.
No, they'll keep those for the rest of their life. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So that's kind of one of the things that we did, and that I was really happy about that. Just and it was a chance for them to go, hey, let's do something fun.
Yeah.
So I got to see a lot of Europe too, doing that, and then just being at some cool places like the Sistine Chapel,
Hmm.
all these beautiful, wonderful places.
I might steal that idea from you.
That's a
Sounds
good.
amazing.
And I got the idea from another parent that I knew where they said pick anywhere in the world as a graduation trip, and then I added the envelope idea, and just and that worked out really well. It was
Yeah,
fun.
that's brilliant.
Yeah, it was fun.
Well, I don't care what your daughters say. I think you're a great dad.
Good. I'm glad somebody does.
Oh,
Hey, by the way, I want to say I think we've probably talked about this, but you're really you're really like responsible for Olivia and Kyle getting married.
oh,
You know that, right?
dude, I was thinking about that earlier this morning, and I'm like, gosh, I hope that's working out well because I don't want Jeff to be pissed at me. I made a bad introduction.
Well, it when we had coffee with you and you said, "Hey, the youth pastor at our church is single," and when we left, Olivia kind of rolled her eyes because she heard that a lot. Here she is,
Uh,
she's this beautiful young lady that was 22, 23 at the time, whatever, and and then we went to Grace, the church. I think that night, I believe I have it marked on my calendar. I think it was a Wednesday,
yeah,
and so I was there when they met, and then it's worked out great, man. Like,
good.
I always call their relationship the $1 million marriage because we raised all that money to do that event during the summer of 2020, and COVID just blew it up. So, we raised almost 2 million, but what I got out of it was a son-in-law, and now I will say that when I prayer walked across, America in 2020 during COVID, um, from Indiana to Kansas, and Olivia messaged me and says, "Hey, Kyle would like to join you." Different people joined me at different times,
Hmm.
when I would walk. And I was like, sure. I didn't think much of it. They'd been dating for like 4 months. And so he joins me that day, and we're 5 minutes into the walk, and he's like, "Hey, I really love your daughter," and he starts to go into this thing, and I'm like, "Dude, you are not doing this to me right now." I mean, my whole world was crumbling. We had put all of our eggs into doing this event. COVID like just obliterated it, and I'm on this walk on this thing called the Trail of Death, and um, Kyle's, popping the question here, and I was like, man, I cannot believe this guy's the nerve to do this. But he said, like, because I was going to end in Kansas City, and all our family's going to be there, and his parents and family were there, and he was like, I know this is sudden, but I'd like to propose to Olivia next week,
Mm.
and I want to, get your blessing. And so it was like, you know, here we go. I mean, it just happened. And you know, it was funny. I'd give him a hard time now, but he's great. We love him, and yeah. But man, you started all the dominoes there.
Well, glad it worked. I'm glad it's worked out.
Yeah,
Man,
man, take the credit.
I haven't even thought about, had you prepared yourself for, I mean, just in general for, because you're gonna I mean, by the time they're all married, three guys are gonna ask your permission to marry a daughter. Did you do any mental preparation, or had you you talked about like you've thought forward in your life from one stage to the next?
Yeah.
Had you been through that in your mind?
Oh yeah, yeah, with daughters. And I'll tell you, like, I I I did one thing when they wanted to get married. You know, my girls knew this. Like, I wanted to talk with them face to face. Um, and both guys that proposed, they lived out of state, so we were together. And there's one thing, and I would say one of the greatest. This is maybe one of the best things as a parent I feel like I've ever done,
Mm.
honestly, that I'm about to say. And because as I thought about it, I thought, okay, the number one thing to me as a dad, where faith is it's central to me. It's central to our family. It's central to our past. What can I do to preserve faith in our family for the next generation? And I can't control that, but what can I do? And here's what I did. When they asked me to marry them, I said, one thing I'm asking you to do. Now, you think naturally you could say, be faithful in your marriage. Well, of course you'd want to do that. Make sure you provide, be the provider. Yeah. Those things are what I would say those are assumptions. They
Yeah.
know I expect that, right? That's a given. But here's what I asked. I said, promise me that you will consistently go to church every week in your marriage. Promise me that I don't care what's going on in your life. I don't care what your work is or what your kids are involved in. Go to church and you be the spiritual leader in that way. Promise me you'll do that. And here's what I've realized, and I think you would resonate with this too. As a pastor, I've seen that when faith is important to them, and then all of a sudden it's not important. There's a common denominator, and they stop going to church. And here's how it goes. One Sunday they wake up and maybe they live in a climate where it's snowy out, or they're tired, they were up too late, and then they go, eh. And this is before the days of streaming.
Hmm.
So, now it's even easier because it's like, I'll just watch it from home, right? So you miss once, the next week you miss, and all of a sudden now it's been 3 weeks that you haven't been there. And then if you're traveling the next weekend, now it's been a month. And now you're out of that habit. And all of a sudden, if you're a parent, now your kids aren't there. And I can't tell you how many hundreds of families that I've met that have said to me, "Hey, fix my kid. They don't, faith is important to them." And I know the family. I go, depending on how blunt I want to be with them, I'm like, you prioritized other things other than faith by not going to church, and now you want me to swoop in and fix them, and I can't do that. I'll do what I can. And so that was my thing. Is I just said, look, if you just promise me you'll go to church, then that's all I ask. And and then that way I know that if they have children, they're going to be raised in church, and I hope they pass on that commitment to the future,
Yeah,
because then it's like, okay, that preserves faith as best as I can from my, position.
that's good. Thank you. Hmm. Um, is talking about Kyle and Olivia, all of that. Is that good for the podcast? I
Yeah,
don't know if
sure.
that's too personal.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
yeah.
Awesome. Um, let me do a end of conversation introduction because I think I'll be able to start this just us jumping in. I think that'll flow nicely. But everyone's going to wonder who is this guy if they don't know
Yeah,
this.
I didn't know if you're going to do intros. You want me to say anything about that?
Yeah. Well, okay. So this is Geoff Eckart, and we probably met first at. Actually, no. You know where I first met you? You. I don't know if you even remember me from this. I was in my first year of ministry at Hyattsville National Wesleyan Church, but I went back to Oklahoma Wesleyan for like the college preview day where they would bring in high school students. That may have been over homecoming too, but Eddie had you come in to speak to all the youth pastors. You did
Oh,
like a little talk there in the cafeteria one night, and that's the first time I met you. And then probably a year later, within that next year, I'd moved to New Life Wesleyan in Southern Maryland and went with James Matchett to NTS.
what year was that? Do you remember?
Dude, that had to have been like 2005 or six
Okay. Yeah, cool.
when the NTS year around there,
Yeah,
one of those summers.
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a
Um,
while.
so, ladies and gentlemen, Geoff Eckart. And you mentioned it, but tell us, oh yeah, tell us what you're doing. You've
Yeah,
always had more than one job. Now you have like four or five.
I do. Yeah, I do, unfortunately. Well, fortunately, yeah. So what I do now, um, yeah, because we're talking about fathers, like I'm a husband, been married 31 years, and we have three daughters, all in as two older ones are married, one's in college. And then I'm lead pastor of a church in Grand Rapids, Michigan called Daybreak. Been in that role for 3 years. Before that, launched a national youth ministry called Never the Same. And if anyone's interested, our website for that is neverthesame.org. And we do summer camps around the country. We have a student prayer initiative called Claim Your Campus, where we have students mobilized in 44 states as of this recording that are praying weekly in their school, praying that God would bring change to their school. That's middle and high school. And then I'm also the chairman of the National Day of Prayer, as well as the National Prayer Committee. And the National Prayer Committee is a coalition of around 100 uh, ministries that focus on praying for America. So, yeah, that's what I'm involved in these days.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'll just say that personally, I feel like I know Jesus better because I know Geoff Eckart. So you've been very influential in my life. You probably use a little more of you in my life, but uh,
Thank you.
next time you're in Kansas City, let me know.